Israel PM Netanyahu agrees to Lebanon ceasefire. Cabinet must approve. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu announces he's agreed to a ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon, but adds the deal has been sent to the cabinet for approval as heavy bombing continues and casualties rise. Israeli forces carry out more air attacks on Lebanon's capital after killing at least 31 people in 24 hours there. Hezbollah also resumes rocket fire on Israel. In the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces kill 11 Palestinians in 3 attacks on the enclaves. North as heavy rain and rising tides add to the plight of displaced Palestinians sheltering in makeshift tents. Israel's genocide in Gaza has killed at least 44,249 Palestinians and wounded 104,746 since October 7, 2023. At least 1,139 people were killed in Israel during the Hamas-led attacks that day, and more than 200 were taken captive. In Lebanon, at least 3,768 people have been killed and 15,699 wounded in Israeli attacks since the war on Gaza began. President Biden set to speak on Israel-Hezbollah truce. U.S. President Joe Biden is set to deliver remarks at the White House following the announcement by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that he's forwarded a ceasefire deal to the cabinet for final approval. Analysts say the Biden administration's unconditional U.S. support for Israel, coupled with Washington's failure to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, emboldened Israel to declare all-out war in Lebanon and push the Middle East to the edge of an abyss. Early into the Israeli war on Gaza, Biden, a staunch supporter of Israel, said preventing a regional war was a top priority of his administration. Yet the U.S. has continued to provide unflinching diplomatic and military backing to Israel despite warnings the violence in Gaza risked spilling over regionally. Here we have a prime minister that says Israel will be able to resume the war at will, and at the sight of any movement by Hezbollah that Israel thinks poses a danger to it. So we are in the midst of a very temporary, fragile truce that Netanyahu was forced into. We cannot overestimate the fragility of the ceasefire, judging from some of the reports that Israel will maintain freedom of action in Lebanon and Israel insists that Hezbollah dismantles and leaves southern Lebanon before any Israeli soldier deploys out of Lebanon. This is going to be a rocky road ahead in the next days and weeks. Israel again strikes Beirut's central commercial district. Israeli forces have struck a crowded neighborhood in central Beirut as part of its biggest attacks on the Lebanese capital since the war escalated in mid-September. The official national news agency, NNA, said an apartment building in Hamra, a bustling commercial area in Beirut, was targeted a short while ago. It also said a hostile drone hit Al-Qard al-Hassan in Zukak al-Blat, referring to a Lebanese association linked to Hezbollah. Israel has intensified its attacks in Beirut in recent days, targeting the capital's southern suburbs as well as central areas that were not hit before, causing widespread panic among fleeing residents. The attacks come as Netanyahu announced a ceasefire that is set to be approved by the Israeli cabinet. Despite trying to project confidence, Netanyahu came off as insecure. This was a defensive statement by Israel's leader. This was an insecure prime minister trying to project an image of bombastic security. I'm not sure he succeeded. I'm not sure the Israeli public for whom this statement was directed are convinced. He tried to project an image of confidence while at the same time not helping to sound insecure about what he's doing, knowing all too well that he promised a lot at the beginning, the total destruction of Hezbollah and transforming the Middle East. But he ended up agreeing to a ceasefire while Hezbollah remains intact and continues to launch rockets against Israel. Death toll in Lebanon rises, 3,823 killed. At least 3,823 people have been killed and 15,859 wounded in Israeli attacks on Lebanon since October 7, 2023, the country's health ministry says. In the latest 24-hour reporting period, 55 people were killed and 160 injured, the ministry added. Netanyahu dances around stated war goals after ceasefire announcement. Netanyahu set the bar very high at the beginning of the war. He was talking about dismantling, about completely annihilating Hezbollah, that it would cease to exist and only then would conditions be ripe for a halt in fighting. Now, he has walked that back. When you look at the agreement that was reached, you have a repeat of the UN Security Council resolution. In no article does it say Israel has the right to attack. It is basically saying that Israel will stop attacking Lebanon and Hezbollah, and other armed groups would also do the same. Netanyahu delivered what he said wouldn't be happy with at the beginning of this war. This war has been very costly in Israel. It has been felt. People feel traumatized, and they do feel let down. This Israeli government is intact. The support for the agreement was almost unanimous. More from PM Netanyahu's TV address on Hezbollah ceasefire. The deal potentially clears the way for an end to a conflict that has killed thousands of people since it was ignited by the Gaza war last year. It's expected to take effect on Wednesday. We will enforce the agreement and respond forcefully to any violation. Together, we will continue until victory, Prime Minister Netanyahu told the Israeli people. In full coordination with the United States, we retain complete military freedom of action. Should Hezbollah violate the agreement or attempt to rearm, we will strike decisively. He said Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran and allied to Hamas, is considerably weaker than it was at the start of the conflict in October 2023. We have set it back decades, eliminated its top leaders, destroyed most of its rockets and missiles, neutralized thousands of fighters, and obliterated years of terror infrastructure near our border, he said. We targeted strategic objectives across Lebanon, shaking Beirut to its core. Ceasefire with Hezbollah seems weak and very difficult to maintain. Alon Pincus, a former ambassador and consul general from Israel, says the ceasefire announcement by Netanyahu seems very fragile because it looks very difficult to maintain and sustain in the long run. Pincus told Al Jazeera the clauses in the agreement are unenforceable. It assumes the Lebanese army will supervise the manufacturing and the sales and transfer of weapons in Lebanon, and that's an impossibility, he said. We all know that the Lebanese army has always shunned any kind of confrontation with Hezbollah. According to Pincus, opposition from the Israeli center-left and the Israeli right is mounting. While some say it's Israel's assault on Gaza that should have ended with the return of the captives, others view the deal with Lebanon as a surrender. Lebanon PM demands immediate implementation of ceasefire. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati says the international community must act swiftly to halt Israeli aggression and implement an immediate ceasefire. His comments came after Netanyahu said in an address that Israel's security cabinet would agree this evening on a truce in its war against the Lebanese group Hezbollah. Netanyahu boasts paradigm shift in security for Israel. People in Lebanon were waiting for this speech. Despite the fact Netanyahu was talking about the Israelis ceasing the ceasefire anytime they want, people will be cherry-picking the positives here. The Israeli Prime Minister talked about a paradigm shift in security for Israel. He mentioned every adversary in the Arab world you can think of, and he made it clear the ceasefire was done on their terms and according to their timing. There is some truth to that. However, there are two conflicts being fought in Lebanon. There is the massive air campaign, and Israel has wreaked devastating havoc across the country. But there's also the ground incursion near the border in the south. Hezbollah has brought any Israeli advance largely to a standstill. Fighters are entrenched there, and that has made this conflict very unpopular inside Israel. So it does need to come to an end. Netanyahu says ceasefire deal will be presented to cabinet for approval. Netanyahu says he will bring the full cabinet an outline of the ceasefire deal with Lebanon's Hezbollah for approval. An agreement means Israel can focus on the Iranian threat, adding, "We are changing the face of the region." Netanyahu pledged Israel will respond if Hezbollah violates the truce. The Lebanese group has yet to comment. Netanyahu pledges to return families in northern Israel to their homes. As we've been reporting, Netanyahu is speaking following a meeting with his security cabinet that discussed a potential ceasefire deal. In his remarks, he said Hezbollah is no longer the same group that launched a war against us, saying Israeli forces set them back decades. He said Israeli forces killed most of the group's leadership and destroyed their infrastructure. Netanyahu also pledged to return families in northern Israel to their homes, a main war objective. We were able to achieve many of our goals during this war, he said. Netanyahu addresses Israelis on Lebanon's ceasefire agreement. Netanyahu is speaking on Israeli television following an hours-long meeting with his security cabinet that discussed the ceasefire deal. The agreement would end Hezbollah's armed presence along the border south of the Litani River and require Israeli troops to withdraw from southern Lebanon. The Lebanese army would then need to deploy in the region. Also a Hezbollah stronghold. Within 60 days, officials said, "We will get you more soon." Israeli strikes on Lebanon's Baalbek kill 10 people. The national news agency reports at least 6 people have been killed in an Israeli air raid on a house in Baalbek in southern Lebanon. Another strike on a different house, also in Baalbek, killed at least 4 other people, the agency said. Israel has intensified its bombing of Lebanon before a possible ceasefire with the Lebanese group Hezbollah. Blinken says Lebanon's ceasefire talks in final stages. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says efforts to secure a ceasefire in Lebanon are in the final stages, and a deal could help end the Israeli war on Gaza. "We're not there yet, but I believe we are in the final stages," Blinken told reporters after a meeting near Rome with his G7 counterparts. By de-escalating tensions in the region, it can also help us to end the conflict in Gaza. 800 European financial groups deal with firms linked to illegal Israeli settlements. A growing number of European financial institutions have a business relationship with companies with ties to illegal Israeli settlements, according to a study by civil society groups. In total, 822 financial institutions this year have relationships with 58 firms actively involved in illegal Israeli settlements versus 776 in 2023, the Don't Buy Into Occupation Coalition report said. They called for heightened scrutiny and, if necessary, divestment. "The indication is that things are going the wrong way," said Andrew Preston, with Norwegian People's Aid, which is one of the 25 European and Palestinian civil society groups that conducted the research. "In our view, European financial institutions should be urgently reassessing their approach to companies involved in the illegal occupation," he told the Geneva Press Club where the report was presented. Among the European firms listed were top banks including BNP Paribas and HSBC, the report said. The 58 partner firms include heavy machinery maker Caterpillar and travel sites Booking.com and Expedia, according to the report. Lebanon announces more deaths in Israeli attacks. As Israeli forces intensify airstrikes on Beirut and other areas across Lebanon, here is a breakdown of the latest casualties, according to Lebanon's health ministry. 3 killed, 10 wounded in central Beirut's Barber area. 6 killed in Chakra, a town in southern Lebanon's Bint Jbeil district. 2 killed in Rashidi in the southern Lebanese port city of Tyre. Many legal doubts about ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu, Italy. There are many legal doubts about the International Criminal Court's, ICC, arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Italy's foreign minister says. There are many legal doubts and feasibility seems to me very theoretical because Netanyahu will never go to a country where he can be arrested, Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani told a news conference after a meeting with his G7 counterparts. Last week, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity relating to the year-long attack on Gaza. Central Beirut has not been spared any of the violence of this war. Warnings issued for West Beirut left a level of fear and panic that have forced people out of the city, out of areas that have been threatened and warned to evacuate. People have now come to the coastal road and are trying to get out of West Beirut as quickly as possible. The coastal road from one end to the other is packed with traffic, packed with people desperate to get out, desperate to get to safety, and all the while they can hear the Israeli drones flying overhead. We do know that Israel has marked 4 buildings and neighborhoods in West Beirut. So far, they haven't been hit, but we do know at least 1 drone strike has been carried out on an apartment building in the central part of the city, and there were no warnings with regards to that apartment.